When responsibility overcomes selfishness, a man's fight for the future of a daughter who isn't his. I don't even know where to begin without it all coming back to me in an overwhelming way. I sit here with a heavy heart, trembling hands and a tight chest, trying to put into words the chaos that has become my life. My name is Rubens. I'm 38 years old, and I've lived for over a decade, taking on responsibilities that were never truly mine, out of obligation, but out of love. I came into Larissa's life when she was 5 years old, small, funny, but already with a suspicious look in her eyes, perhaps a reflection of her biological father's abandonment. I became the responsible adult, the one who picked her up from school, who paid for her clothes, who was there when no one else was. It was my way of loving, without expecting recognition, simply wanting to provide security for the girl who grew up before my eyes. I never imagined that this love, which I always considered unconditional, could become a source of such intense conflict, to the point of leaving me feeling grounded, yet teaching me more than any superficial victory could. Everything began to fall apart when Larissa started dating Raphael, an older man, 18. I tried to set boundaries, explained the risks, tried to be firm, but every word seemed to echo in the void. Isabella, my wife, not only didn't support me, but constantly reminded me that I wasn't the biological father, that I had no authority. Feeling disrespected in your own home corrodes, but feeling ignored when responsibility and care are genuine hurts in a way that can't be explained. Every attempt at dialogue ended in arguments, tears, or heavy silence. I found myself caught between the love I had for my family and the need to set boundaries that no one wanted to respect. The nights were long, filled with insomnia, repetitive thoughts, and memories of when Larissa was a child, smiling at me without fear, without a doubt. The situation exploded when Larissa believed she was pregnant. She came to me, asking for support, seeking comfort from the stepfather who shouldn't interfere. I felt my chest tighten with helplessness and anger at the same time. I wanted to protect her, but I was constantly reminded that my involvement was illegitimate. At the same time, I felt that any action I took would be manipulated, used against me, as if my love were a crime. It was at that moment that I realized I was losing authority, that my silence or passivity only reinforced behaviors that distanced me from the figure I always wanted to be, someone present, fair, and firm. The feeling of failure was overwhelming, and the urge to give up, to simply disconnect from everything, began to haunt me day and night. I remember one specific day, sitting on the couch, staring into space, my body heavy, my shoulders slumped, a sense of defeat mixed with physical and mental exhaustion, my stomach churning, my heart racing. I felt every mistake Isabella made, every slip-up Larissa made, and every absence of Marcos, my biological father, like continuous stab wounds. I spent hours reliving situations, wondering if it was worth keeping trying, if my presence truly mattered, if I would ever be recognized. It was painful to realize that love, even genuine love, isn't always enough to be respected. And there, on that couch, I realized I needed to make a drastic decision. Either I continued to wear myself out in vain, or I would start setting real boundaries, no matter the cost. It was then that, even though I was afraid of conflict, with my heart heavy and my mind in turmoil, I decided to act. I set clear boundaries. I cut off excessive financial involvement, began guiding Larissa with rules she had to follow, and began the divorce process. Each step was painful. Every disapproving look from Isabella cut me to the core. Every tear from Larissa seemed to weigh heavily on my shoulders. But I knew that inaction would only worsen the problem. It was the moment I realized that discipline, love, and justice needed to go hand in hand, and that even though I wasn't the biological father, I had the right to protect, guide, and make my family face the consequences of their choices. The separation process was a whirlwind of emotions and confrontations. Every conversation with Isabella turned into a silent battle, filled with veiled accusations and contempt. My body felt tired, my shoulders tense, and my head spinning with every word I heard. Yet there was an inner flame that reminded me why I was doing this. It wasn't selfishness, it wasn't revenge, it was protection. Protection for Larissa, for myself, and for what we considered family, even if only I saw it that way. I remember sitting in the kitchen, watching the coffee cup cool and feeling the weight of emptiness. Each decision felt like a deep cut, but I had to keep going. It was a period of intense loneliness, and doubt gnawed at me. Would Larissa ever understand my choices? Was I losing the battle before I even saw her grow up? Marcos, the biological father, reappeared just when everything seemed about to stabilize. He arrived with empty words and old promises, trying to position himself as a savior or someone who could fix the situation. My anger was instantaneous, but I learned to control it. His every word reminded me of years of absence, of mistakes I'd covered up, of sleepless nights, of responsibilities I'd shouldered alone. I stood in the living room, my fists clenched, feeling every beat of my heart like a war drum, knowing that any aggressive reaction could put me on the wrong side of history. It was at that moment that I realized my fight wasn't just for discipline, but also for not letting myself be dragged down by resentment. Larissa reacted with extreme defiance. She tried to manipulate situations, deceive, and surreptitiously ask for money, using my goodwill against me. Each uncovered lie tightened my chest, and frustration exhausted me. I found myself confronting each action, explaining the consequences, and still being ignored. I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and helplessness that seemed to erode my strength. The sleepless nights returned, but now accompanied by anxiety, fear of what might happen if I backed down. The feeling of constantly chasing after, trying to balance love and discipline was physical. Arms ached from so much gesturing during arguments, tension in my neck, head throbbing. From so much thinking, even in the face of chaos, there were moments of clarity. I realized I couldn't control everything, that Larissa needed to make mistakes to learn, that I needed to be firm even when it hurt. I began recording our conversations, planning concrete rules, establishing clear boundaries about what was acceptable and what wasn't. Each step was measured, but not without mistakes. Sometimes my patience wore thin, I exploded, then felt guilty and had to start over. This process was painful, but it taught me something essential. Discipline isn't punishment, it's structured love. That's when I understood that being firm didn't distance me from my family. On the contrary, it brought me closer to a truth that everyone needed to face. The most critical moment was when Larissa did indeed become pregnant, but with Raphael, and he refused to take any responsibility. The news hit me like a punch in the gut, a mixture of frustration, fear, and helplessness. But this time, I didn't back down. I held my breath, felt my heart race, but kept my gaze steady. I needed to be the structure no one else wanted to be. Every decision I made from then on was thoughtful. How to provide security, how to teach responsibility, how to demonstrate consequences without destroying the relationship. I learned that unconditional love also needs clear boundaries, and that protecting someone doesn't mean doing everything for them, but ensuring they learn to take responsibility. When Larissa discovered she was pregnant, I felt a mixture of shock and responsibility that held me back for days. I paced the house aimlessly, clenching my fists, my head pounding, and my heart racing. It was a weight I couldn't ignore, but I also couldn't carry alone. Raphael refused to take any responsibility, and Isabella kept reminding me that I wasn't the biological father. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming, and at the same time, something inside me told me I couldn't give up. I needed to be The anchor that family, however reluctantly, never wanted to acknowledge. Sitting on the edge of the bed, remembering every birthday, every achievement, and every tear Larissa shed, I realized my love needed to be transformed into concrete action. I decided to take on the role no one else wanted. I spoke firmly with Larissa, explaining that adulthood has real consequences, that impulsive choices have lasting impacts. I saw her eyes well up, felt her anger, her frustration, but also sensed a glimmer of understanding. Every step I took to establish boundaries required physical and emotional effort. Sleepless nights, intense arguments, constant rule revisions. But all of that was dwarfed by the feeling of doing the right thing. For the first time, I felt that discipline, love, and responsibility could go hand in hand, even if she was slow to recognize it. The confrontation with Raphael was another turning point. I stood my ground, even when my anger boiled, even when I wanted to. Scream, beat my chest, and take justice into my own hands. I breathed deeply, felt the pressure on my shoulders, my heart hammering, but I spoke clearly, setting limits, demonstrating consequences, and demanding respect. It was painful to realize that not all the adults around me were ready to take responsibility, but it was also revealing. My role didn't depend on their recognition. It was my own conscience that needed to be at peace, knowing that I was trying to build a solid foundation for Larissa to face life. During this time, I also faced my own doubt. How much could I help without hurting myself? Each decision to limit my financial or emotional involvement came with guilt and anxiety. I remember sitting alone on the porch, feeling the cold wind on my face, remembering when Larissa was little, holding my hands and trusting me blindly. Now, she challenged my rules, tested my limits, and I needed to be firm without losing connection. Each step of the process was painful, but it also taught me patience, empathy, and resilience. Over time, Larissa began to understand that my actions weren't punishment, but protection. Small signs of recognition emerged: more sincere conversations, requests for advice, respect for the rules I'd established. It was like seeing a ray of light at the end of the tunnel, proof that even in the face of mistakes, rebellion, and impulsive choices, it was possible to guide someone without sacrificing principles. My body felt tired, my muscles tense from so much struggle, but my heart began to calm, feeling that despite the pain, every effort had been worth it. Larissa's pregnancy became a turning point. I felt my body tense, my stomach churning. Each step inside the house felt heavier than the last. It wasn't just about her or Raphael, it was about my responsibility as an adult. As someone who had always been there, I needed to be firm, but also supportive. Every doctor's appointment I attended, every conversation about choices and consequences was a physical and emotional reminder of the weight I carried. My chest tightened, but somehow I felt that tightness was also a sign that I could still make a difference. The days became a routine of clear boundaries, firm rules, and many difficult conversations. Larissa reacted with anger and frustration, defying every instruction. I felt my heart race, my muscles tense from so much emotional vigilance, but I resisted. My patience was tested daily. There were times when I wanted to give up, isolate myself, let life take its course without my interference. But the memory of all the years I cared for her, of the small details no one else saw, kept me steady. It was like carrying an anchor, heavy, but necessary to avoid being swept away by the chaos. Raphael continued to shirk responsibility, and each confrontation with him required not only courage, but also physical and emotional control. My body was exhausted, sleepless nights, shoulder tension, constant headaches. But I learned to breathe deeply, to count to 10 before responding, to remain calm even when everything around me seemed about to explode. It was a process of intense self-control, in which each decision had to be made clearly, without letting anger or fear dictate my actions. There were days when Larissa tried to manipulate situations, ask for money, ignore rules, and I felt the physical and emotional exhaustion almost overwhelm me, but I resisted. With each challenge, I learned the importance of consistent boundaries even in the face of protests and tears. It was painful, yes, but also revealing. I realized that my love didn't need to be permissive to be true. It needed to be structured, demand responsibility, and demonstrate consequences. That's how I began to see small but real changes in her attitude and the respect that was beginning to emerge. Even through sleepless nights and endless arguments, I began to feel something inside me shift. The pain remained. The fear didn't disappear, but a sense of purpose began to grow. I understood that the discipline I established wasn't punishment, but love in the form of structure. Larissa might not fully recognize it yet, but each step I took helped pave the way for her to face life more consciously. And in the process, I also rebuilt myself, discovering strength, resilience, and the ability to love firmly and fairly. When Larissa turned 18, things reached a boiling point. She was pregnant. Raphael refused to take responsibility, and Isabella remained emotionally distant, failing to acknowledge my role. My body felt exhausted, my head throbbing, but there was a clarity I'd never felt before. I needed to remain strong, to be the pillar no one else wanted to be. Every conversation with Larissa required patience, explanations, and restructuring of expectations. My heart raced with every tear, every harsh word, but I kept my gaze firm, remembering that discipline and love can coexist even in the most painful moments. The following months were an intense learning experience. I attended appointments, guided choices, and established financial and emotional boundaries. Each step was exhausting, but also revealing. I felt the tension in my body, my shoulders ached, my mind constantly on alert. However, I noticed small changes. Larissa began to accept responsibility, listen to advice, and gradually understand that my actions were not about control, but protection. Each small victory brought physical and emotional relief, a feeling of mission accomplished, even if no one but me recognized it. Raphael remained distant, and my frustration was intense. But I learned to focus on what I could control: my attitude, my decisions, and my support for Larissa. My heart sank as I reminded her of her mistakes, but I also felt proud of every step she took toward maturity. Experience taught me that truly loving someone isn't just about comforting, it's about guiding, correcting, showing consequences, and standing firm, even when it hurts. Looking back today, I see that I survived months of emotional tension, confrontation, and loneliness, and that each moment of pain brought learning. I learned that responsibility isn't imposed solely by blood, that clear boundaries are acts of love, and that my structured presence was essential, even if never fully recognized. My body still bears the marks of fatigue, my mind the memories of sleepless nights, but my heart knows I did the best I could. The lesson I want to share is simple. True love requires discipline, courage, and resilience. It's possible to face seemingly insurmountable challenges, deal with difficult people, and still maintain integrity and compassion. It's not easy, and some of the pain remains, but it's possible to overcome, or at least guide those we love toward better choices. I believe my story can inspire others to act with firmness and love, showing that even amidst rebellion, selfishness, and pain, there is a path to reconstruction, responsibility, and ultimately hope.